Great, thank you very much, Todd. And thank you very much to all of you who've popped by to listen. It's very nice to meet you all virtually, and great that I can have this opportunity to talk about our markets up here. So, as Todd mentioned, we've been here since 2019, and it was, I think, 20 years since a South Australian presence in Japan. And as it turned out, very fortuitous timing with the fact that, you know, we are able to represent South Australians in market when no one can move anywhere. And so I'm in Japan, in Tokyo, and we have a business development manager, MJ, who Todd introduced, who's based in Seoul, and she's been there since August last year, I think, and hit the ground running. So as Todd also mentioned, we are very, very much commercially focused. I'm from a commercial background. This is my first stint in government. So I think that really comes out in what we do here in market to help businesses like yours succeed. So just a quick overview of both markets. We're in a really fortunate position in that we have great relationships between Australia and Japan and South Korea. And that's never been more important than now. And just a quick story, but I caught a taxi this morning to the office, and the taxi driver, as most taxi drivers do, ask, you know, are you from Australia? We're going to the Australian Embassy. Yes. And he really, he was an interesting fellow. He used to be in finance, and now he's a taxi driver. And he was talking about how important our relationships are. And it's not just about wheat and wine and all of that kind of stuff. Right now, with you know, geopolitical tensions and economic tensions, our relationships are really, really important. And I thought that really hit home, and particularly since we're talking about this today. With Korea as well, it's the 60th anniversary of a diplomatic presence in Korea this year. So there's lots going on between Australia and Korea that we can leverage. We have terrific market access here. As you can see on the screen, we've got JPA, which is the Japan-Australia Economic Trade Pact, the CPTPP, and the Korean Trade Agreement, CAFTA. And this enables us to have great market access for a number of products coming from Australia, particularly South Australia. Also, I believe Korea is looking at joining the CPTPP, and they've been having informal consultations with a number of countries, including Australia, about how to join that. It, you know, CPTPP has quite high standards, and if the Republic of Korea joins, it really will give us an improvement on market access, particularly in food and agriculture. Both countries are very similar. In Japan, you know, we are looking at growing market share. Sometimes it's quite difficult, particularly, I'll give an example like wine. Wine is a pretty much stagnant sector, but there's the ability to grow our share of that sector. For Korea, there's a lot of growth potential, particularly in wine, if we're using that example. And I look at Korea, not disparagingly at all, but Korea is kind of like a mini Japan, I suppose, Japan's little sister. So there are a number of similarities, but I think Korea is really catching up, and we can look at some exciting growth there. There are significant synergies with South Australia. You know, since both countries, Japan and Korea, have made announcements of net zero carbon by 2050. You know, that's got great synergy with South Australia's clean energy transition, and we leverage our position as Australia's leading state in renewable energy production to really underpin our commitment to sustainability across all sectors, you know, from farming and production practices to high tech and biomed as well. So these synergies are really favourable. And both countries are really looking forward to getting travel bubbles up and running. And there are a number of young people here in both countries who are really keen to get on a plane and get over to one of the world's safest cities to continue their international education, for example, and for businesses also to come over and see the lay of the land, because that's how a lot of business is done with corporations from both countries. They go over, they have to touch the land, see the product with their own eyes, see what's going on. So restrictions, travel restrictions there have really put a dampener on that. Okay, thank you, Ben. Current market conditions, you may have seen that we, in Japan, we are in our third state of emergency. And what does that really mean? I'm at the office, obviously, I'm not at home. It means that we are working with COVID. So we work with the restrictions that we have and do the best we can. But it's really had quite a devastating effect on, obviously, the travel industry and the hospitality industry. With restrictions at the moment, I think this will go on till the 11th of May. We are coming up to a holiday period in Japan called Golden Week. So no one will be able to travel, and it also means restaurants will have to close early and no alcohol to be served at restaurants and bars. Apparently, alcohol is the big culprit over here. So that's off-premise is okay, but on-premise, no grog, which is disappointing, but hopefully it won't extend past the 11th. But we are living with COVID. With COVID has become part of the vernacular here. It's how we're going to live from now on. We can't just close borders, but there have been severe restrictions because numbers have to get down before the Olympics go ahead. And there we have the question, will they go ahead or not? So this has kind of put a dampener on the spirits of the Japanese. It was supposed to showcase how terrific Japan is, and it looks like that won't be the case. But at least we'll get to show how well we can take Australia's, the Australian Open as an example, and Japan can show how the Olympics can be done in a safe environment, relatively safe environment. So yeah, restrictions on movement as well, which has had devastating impacts. But people, we have a phrase here called gaman, which means we just kind of get down and get on with it, and wear our masks, work with the restrictions, and see how we go. So e-commerce is booming thanks to COVID. Everyone is online, and that means elderly people, young people, people who would never have shopped online before, which gives us great opportunities as well. Japan is the land of the fax and the catalogue, and while these are still around, people are going online to buy absolutely anything and everything. So we're looking at how we can leverage that as a state office here. And face-to-face still rules. So while we are embracing virtual tastings, virtual conferences, Zoom meetings, all of that kind of stuff, in Japan, the face-to-face meeting is still going to override anything virtual. So as I'll talk a little bit later in the presentation, we have worked as much as we can with restrictions to do as much face-to-face showcasing as we can too. Opportunities. So with challenges with COVID, we can also see there are a number of opportunities, and particularly with how Japan and Korea work with their own challenges post-COVID. And as you can see, I've listed them up here. Like most countries around the world, Japan and Korea are seeking secure, resilient supply chains. They're seeking functional, healthy food with perceived health benefits. And this is really something that South Australian companies can really grab and take advantage of. Sustainable, again, the sustainability factor plays a huge role here. Natural, organic, this is for both countries. And I will talk about this a little bit later, but we have started working with the opportunities, particularly with this functional, healthy food demand from both countries that we haven't seen before. And it's across the board. It's not just with elderly people who are looking for functional food, it's for young people, it's for mothers. People here in both countries are really looking at what they're eating, what they're drinking, and what they're spending their money on. And this is something really important that we have to grab as South Australian producers. In Korea, we see opportunities in biomed, in wine, for example. I mentioned before there's huge growth opportunities for wine, premium goods, seafood, meat, lamb, for example. In Japan, again, functional food are premium goods. Japan is expecting a huge rush in tourists coming to Japan as soon as people can move around. It's listed as #1, I think, on a number of surveys where people have been asked of where they're going to go to first when they can. And Japan is expecting a huge rush of people. So I think that's a great opportunity to get prepared while we can, while everything is locked down and what have you, by getting hotels and restaurants and supermarkets ready for the rush and ready with our premium food and wine products. Okay, next slide, please. I have been in market for 20 years, and I think this is a really, really important point with the office, is that I understand the market, and I work with a colleague here who I worked with at Austrade before we poached her for this office, and we are in the market here now. Japan is no longer 1980s, it's no longer 1990s, it's very, very different. And I think that insight is really important. We can supply you with up-to-date information on current conditions. We work with your partners on the ground. And again, I think we've spent over the past year and a half or year or so that we've been in this kind of COVID non-moving environment. I think having the office here has probably been really critical for a number of businesses in South Australia. We can talk with partners, we can go and visit, we can do what we can in lieu of people actually travelling. So, and we're creating platforms to engage with potential partners too. So we look at the market, we look at our business plans change quite a lot. They have, as Todd will tell you, we work on a business plan and then something happens and we have to really be flexible in our way of thinking and be creative. But it's worked out well so far, I think. We've done a number of events. For example, I've mentioned previously a functional food event. We just had a week of Tasting South Australia, which was a wine and food B2B showcase, incorporating a bit of B2C element as well. And that was for new to market products and also for products in market. So we really support you once in market. And I think that's a great selling point when you're talking with potential partners as well. When your product is here, when you have your partner, we can support you as much as possible for them to grow that business in market and to grow the sector as well. And we can keep the momentum going when you can't. So we expect once borders open and once people can move around, that we will have a huge influx of people coming to visit market, which is terrific. That's the best thing you can do to support your partner in market. If you have one, or once you find one, nothing beats coming to market and supporting that partner how you can. But in the meanwhile, we can assist there as much as possible.
Thanks, Sally.
Thank you.
Go to Q&A. We've got a bit of a question and answer, and hopefully you've got a heap of questions for Sally. This is your time, ladies and gentlemen, to ask some questions, and I'll run around with the mic and do that. But I guess beyond that is just to know that Sally's right. Probably out of all of the markets around the world, and some of you in the room are in multiple markets, I guess the pandemic's got business to change the way they do business. So the old standing at the trade fair, eyeballing someone, shaking their hand, and all of that has changed quite a bit in most markets. People are having to get used to doing things virtually. Japan, bit kind of not hesitant, but just culturally much still around the handshake and the eyeballing. So and Sally's been amazing at this. So in Japan, we do hybrid type events where Sally and the team will work with, if you've got an existing imported partner, working with them in market to represent you at an event. But when we do the virtual event, at times where we've had a booth and there'll be a screen at your booth and you can be there to help do the pitch, but then either our staff or your partner in market will be there to talk to those customers. So it's quite a unique piece. And we've been trialing and having, as I said to someone earlier, to Barry, it's about having a crack and having a go. So we're trying new things all the time because what used to be is not anymore, and the new normal and the next normal and whatever that's going to look like. We're just trying to be as agile and nimble to the needs of our businesses in South Australia as we can. So just in terms of other places of support that you can get, as you know, some of you may know or may not know, we've got a whole bunch of trade advisors across the state, pretty much from Port Lincoln right around regionally to Mount Gambier and right through Adelaide as well. So Trade Start, our advisor network, Anthony Grundell's in the room, who's in our northern region, and the Barossa Clare. Welcome, Ant. And those guys are there. It should be your first port of call. So, we've got our overseas officers. They're there to connect and get you connected. But your first port of call in terms of everything from your export strategy, your kind of export, how you get out there to market. A big piece of work that these guys do is around market selection. So, where someone might say Japan, 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 when you start doing a bit of market research, Japan may not be the market for you because of either the length of time it'll take to get a decision or otherwise. So they're there to help you with that. And then they can connect you through to our staff overseas where we see appropriate. We're doing a heap of different virtual programs around the world. I did a count last night, Belinda. I think we've got 20 virtual programs right now going on all over the world in pretty much every market that we're in. So they are constant. Our website, dti.sa.gov.au, has a whole bunch of stuff in there. We've got sector teams that are based here that are specific to that. So beyond food and wine, Sally's done a heap of work in the hydrogen space and renewable energy. We've also do a lot of work in the defence sector and space as well. That's another exciting new piece of sector that's for this state with the Space Agency. There's also funding support. So, traditionally a bit of government stuff. What can you get for us in terms of grants? But we do have a number of different programs, SA Export Accelerator, our ECAP, the e-commerce kind of growth plans that Sally talked about before, global expansion program, and EMDG, which is the Austrade's federal grant system as well. So there's actually a heap of different types of support you can get. But what I would say, absolutely, some of the best support you'll get is from the trade advisors and from our overseas officers, because there's nothing like getting actual advice and where people know the markets and know what they're doing and know what the conditions are to help you navigate through it. All right. So that's my sell slide. Right. There's my sell job for the government. Right. So Q&A, questions.
Thank you, Sally. And I'm just wondering, in Japan, is there any free trade agreement with Australia? So there is no duty or anything for wine or food sector to Japan? Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can. Thank you for your question. Yes, there are two trade agreements, the JPA and the PP. And these are quite broad trade agreements, but they do not cover every food and wine sector. So for JPA, for example, thanks to JPA, this was over 7 years, tariffs on wine went down to 0. So as of April this year, there is no tariff on wine. However, there's recently been a tax put on wine, which is quite low, but I mean, tiny really compared to, you know, what we send over to Japan. Japan is premium wine. It doesn't make, I mean, sorry, Australian wine sent over is premium. It doesn't make a huge difference. For example, on dairy, the tariff is very, very high. It's 26%. And there are quotas on dairy as well. So it depends on the product. But wine at the moment, tariff is 0. There's a very small tax, so it's really negligible.
Thank you. How about beer?
Thanks.
Beer there tariff or duty?
Yeah, beer duty on beer is also 0.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Sally, I'll ask you a question. You mentioned e-commerce. So yeah, we've heard about Tmall and the Alibaba piece in China, and there's you know, obviously Amazon, you know, massive in the US and big in India as well and other parts of the world. So what, in terms of Australian type products, what types of platforms are in Japan? Because that's actually had quite a mature e-commerce channel for quite a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's true. A lot of companies have their own sites, and there is also a company called Rakuten that has their e-commerce site, and this is probably the biggest one in Japan. And this is what we're looking at the moment and how we can get on there. And Rakuten is really, for Australians looking at it, it's just a mess. There's so much information on there. There's so many banners, and it doesn't really look terrific for us, but it works. Japanese people love information. So when you look at Amazon, for example, there's a product and usually the information has been put up in English, and then there's Google Translate. So sometimes a little bit of an odd translation in Japanese, but Rakuten, you know, you put a product up or put this pen up and you have the life story of that pen, the person who made the pen, the person who should own the pen, and it works. So that's what we're looking at, and how we can work with partners in market and support them. There are a number of products on Rakuten. Most of it is wine, and from South Australia, I'd say wine would be the number one thing, and now we're seeing a little bit of honey on there as well.
So just a question in terms of wine. When you look at the market where it was before the circumstances, what's the percentage of on-premise, so to speak, and off-premise sales in wine? Would you know that?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. So since COVID, is that what you mean? How's it changed?
Yes.
So on-premise on-premise has just been a bit of a disaster. And before, on-premise wine sales were much greater than off-premise wine sales. I don't know the percentages, but I can tell you from, you know, speaking with wine importers here in market, particularly, I just met with a number of them last week during our events, and wine importers that have wine in shops, wine online, or their own private wine customers have done okay through COVID. Wine importers that just concentrated on restaurants and hotels have unfortunately done pretty poorly. And, you know, the government did bring in tax changes. So restaurants, for example, could sell their wine. A lot of restaurants were doing takeaways, and up until COVID, you could not sell a bottle of wine without opening it. You had to open it, pour some in a glass, and then, you know, that's how you could sell wine in a restaurant. But the government did bring in these changes where you could go get takeaway and get a bottle of wine as well from that restaurant. So that has helped. But, you know, if you're a wine exporter, looking at the market, I'd definitely be looking at an importer that has their wine at off and on premise venues.
So the other big piece about exporting in general, but particularly Japan, is most of this is a long game, and a couple of you in the room are quite seasoned at this and know that exporting is quite a dedicated, and it can be a long game and a bit of a kind of hilly ride along the way. But we're here to help you, and so thanks, Sally. Thanks for your time this morning. And
My
the time
pleasure.
zone with the daylight saving worked pretty well this morning. So big round of applause for Sally. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on.